Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say what a huge pleasure it is to see you back in the chair, and what better day to be discussing this than on International Women's Day. So can I wish all of the women and men in this chamber happy International Women's Day. And isn't it wonderful that there are so many of us now? You know, it's just wonderful to see so many women in politics making a contribution, debating these issues. And on behalf of all of us, I'd like to encourage every young woman who has political interests and ambitions of whatever party, just get stuck in and we'll help you. You know, come and join us. You'd be most welcome. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, I wanted to pay real tribute to my honourable friend on the front bench, who has been such an advocate for the thing I think everyone in this place knows, am so passionate about, and that is giving every baby the best start for life. And the lovely thing about that is that I am so far not alone. Everybody I talk to of every party is incredibly supportive, because we all know from bitter experience of constituency cases, from what we've read, from what we've learned as politicians and in our lives, how absolutely critical it is that every single baby gets a chance at the best start for life. And just to set out some of the statistics, what we know is that the Early Intervention Foundation set out in their study that the cost of late intervention to our economy is about £17 billion a year. That was their work in 2016. Of that, almost a third of it is the cost of looked after children, who are some children who have some of the worst outcomes in the country is for those who are removed from their families and taken into care. And it is absolutely shocking that so much money is spent achieving such poor outcomes for them. And then huge parts of that 17 billion are in areas like domestic violence and like young people who are then not in employment, training or education, and whose life chances have just been so hampered by not getting the best start. Already my honourable friend for Worcester mentioned the work of Professor James Heckman looking at the rates of return to human capital investment, which so clearly show, if you don't care about human happiness, just look at the money, follow the money. You can clearly see £1, $1 in his case, invested antenatally pays exponentially more in terms of return to the human potential of that child and the lower cost to society later on than £1 or $1 spent once you're already into the realms of youth crime or perhaps mental illness and so on later on down the line. So financially, prevention is not just kinder, it's so much cheaper than cure. And then right across our United Kingdom, across the world, there is growing wealth of evidence. I pay tribute to the Princess of Wales for her amazing work through the Early Childhood Foundation in looking at how parents struggle, how many parents really don't know, they don't feel confident to know what their baby needs. I've talked to consultant paediatricians through my work as the government's early years healthy development advisor, and I quote one male paediatrician who said to me, well, I'm supposedly an expert in this field, but when my wife and I had our baby, we were like, what do we do with this? And this is the challenge. It's not about nanny state, it's not about interfering, it's that any of us, I had 3, and by the 3rd time I was just like, well, I think I've got this sussed now, but, my 19-year-old still gives me hell. But, you do, when you first have a child, you're just like, what am I supposed to do with this? You take that beautiful, squeaky new baby home, and once you've got over the stitches and the other horrific, unspeakable things that befall the women who are concerned, then you're actually trying to focus on the fact that you've had no sleep, and that's an effective form of torture, isn't it, Madam Deputy Speaker? We all know what it's like if you've had no sleep. And when your baby, as my first one, doesn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time, you know, that one class that I just vaguely recalled antenatally, where they said, you know, what's your 24-hour clock like before you have your baby? And we're all like, you know, well, between 11 and about 7, I'm fast asleep. And they're like, okay, now once you've had the baby, what do you think it's going to be like then? And we're all like, well, I don't really know, actually. So all of these things, you know, it is so difficult having a baby. And you can be as rich as Croesus, you can be happily married, you can have all the support and the nannies in the world, you can have maternity nurses, and actually I pay tribute to them in the Netherlands because they have 95% of babies born at home, and you get a free maternity nurse on the state. I would do that trade any day of the week. I mean, hands up, who wouldn't do that trade? You know, somebody who is actually going to take the baby off you so you can get a few hours sleep and so on. It is extraordinary. So I hope I'm not freaking anyone out who's thinking of having a baby. It's the most glorious thing you ever do. And I think the fact that so many of our colleagues have young children in this chamber, you know, I was proud as Leader of the Commons to introduce proxy voting for baby leave, because knowing, oh my goodness, you can't just sit at home and watch everyone voting and hope that your slip is going to be, you know, adhered to. You actually do need to continue your life. And so for many, many women and men, it is the most difficult thing they ever do. And actually, what's so appalling in my view is you're not allowed to say, are you? You're really not allowed to say. So I was, when I had my first child, I was working at Barclays. I'd just been appointed senior executive, one of only 8 women. It's an absolute, you know, badge of honour. And they said, we'll do this appointment if you'll come back after 10 weeks. I know that is extraordinary now because you couldn't legally do that now, but in those days you could. And I said yes, which is really stupid. And in hindsight, why on earth did I say yes? Anyway, so ensued 2 miscarriages, postnatal depression, awful trauma, and I left, and it was not a happy experience. But I say that because I think you're not allowed to say, you're never allowed to say when things are difficult and you're really struggling, and you really want to keep your career. You know, we do want to have it all, and it's understandable we want to have it all, but actually at the moment we really can't. And so there are 2 things that I think we absolutely have to focus on. The first one is the incredible investment in the early years. And again, I pay tribute to my honourable friend on the front bench and to the Prime Minister, who as Chancellor funded this incredible project, and also to the Chancellor, because he's, as a backbencher, as chair of the Health Select Committee, he was absolutely supportive of the Best Start for Life, and to colleagues opposite. I mean, one of my earliest friends in this place was the wonderful Lord Frankfield, if I may use his name, since he's no longer an MP, and of course the even more wonderful, if that's possible, Dame Tessa Jowell, both of whom have been such advocates for giving every baby the best start for life. And so what the government is seeking to do is to really provide that support. My honourable friend who is no longer in his place, he talked about the importance of early years settings to build families' own capacity to be parents, so you can chat to people about, well, what size nappies are you using? Have you weaned yet? You know, what are you feeding your baby? Because this isn't, you know, you don't get a manual, do you? I mean, you should get a manual, but you don't get a manual. And actually, the thing you don't get, which you should get, is an on-off button, don't you think, Madam Deputy Speaker? I'm sure Matthew would agree. Yeah. Certainly when Madam Deputy Speaker's son used to sit in his sitting room opposite mine and play my music in my flat from his Bluetooth. I wanted an on-off button then. He was a bit older. But actually, you know, that is one of the challenges that we have as parents, is that there's no manual. And actually, how do we get that information? And so the government's programme of family hubs, rolling out family hubs across England. I wish we could roll them out across the UK, and we'll be working with our colleagues in the devolved administrations to make that the case. In Scotland, they've got parent-infant mental health absolutely sorted, but they don't have family hubs. And talking to some colleagues who are Scottish parliamentarians, they would be very keen to follow what we're doing here. I do think we can learn from each other. from around the world. You know, in Chile, they have the most wonderful support for new mums that we don't currently have here. But we are starting that rollout. We are starting to roll out the family hubs across England. And most importantly, in my view, we're rolling out the Best Start for Life. 6 universal services, so that you'll go to a family hub, you'll be able to get antenatal midwifery checks, you'll be able to chat to a health visitor, you'll be able to seek support for yours or your partner's or any member of your family's mental health issues or for your relationship with your baby. You'll be able to get breastfeeding support. I mean, this is the ridiculous thing as well, is we're all expected to know how to do that, aren't we? How on earth do you breastfeed a baby? Who knows? Any hands up? Any of the men, hands up? No. You don't get a manual for that either. And actually, women do need a lot of support. You know, when you have a 5-year-old, you don't give them a 2-wheel bicycle and say, right, off you go, darling. Do you? No, you don't do that, do you? You hold the back of the seat until they've got the hang of pedalling. But actually, with breastfeeding support, you know, some of our breastfeeding rates are the worst in Western Europe, and that's because no one gets any help. And if you look at...
On that, will she take an unlikely intervention?
My colleague is going to tell us how to breastfeed, ladies.
What I was going to say is I've never name-checked them in this house, but Auntie Jane and Auntie Jenny, who ran babies, and still it still exists in Winchester, babies breastfeed support group at Lanterns in the city. I remember going to them one morning after we'd had a dreadful night with our first, Emily, who's 15 now, and still a challenge, but a dreadful night, and we were just desperate, and the only thing that got us through to daylight was knowing that Auntie Jane and Auntie Jenny we were seeing in the morning. And I remember taking my wife and Emily down to see them, and they provide amazing support, as do such support groups all over this country. So Auntie Jane and Auntie Jenny, thank you.
Well, that is absolutely lovely, and I do pay tribute to the actually thousands of volunteers who provide breastfeeding support. And I think my honourable friend highlights perfectly one of the great challenges of becoming a new parent and really struggling. And of course, that does have a high correlation with mental health issues, because women who do want to breastfeed their baby and find they can't and there isn't enough support really do then suffer from feelings of guilt and that they failed and that they're not good enough, and that lends itself to the problems of postnatal depression that are only too prevalent right across England. So to recap again, midwifery, health visiting, mental health support, breastfeeding support, safeguarding support and disability support universally available in family hubs to help every family to give their baby the best start for life. And not only that, but also universal plus support for the more tricky, challenging issues of prospects of domestic violence. We know up to 30% of domestic violence starts in pregnancy because of the partner's own feelings that, you know, this person is going to love this baby more than they love me. So all of these challenges that are really brought out by pregnancy are quite desperate to be solved. And so what we do know is that if we can get the hang of giving every baby the best start for life, that will transform our society. That's £17 billion of late interventions. The Maternal Mental Health Alliance's study that shows around 8 billion per year of every new cohort of births as a direct result of the cost of maternal poor mental health in that perinatal period. We know that the 1001 Critical Days APPG has also demonstrated the reduction in later problems of school readiness, in the later propensity of children to get into gangs and to have poor mental health, to then fail to learn and do well at school. We know that the 1970 cohort study showed, significantly later on, that only 18% of children in the bottom 25% academically age 5 get 1 or more A-levels, versus 60% of those in the top 25% at age 5. So we know that what happens to you in the earliest years follows you throughout your life. So the more we can do in that earliest period, the better. So the government is totally on the right lines. Delighted to give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, and I applaud her work on the early years. As she knows, I share her enthusiasm. We're talking today about the estimates for DFE, but what role does she think public health has to play in educating parents about, in particular, our shared passion for attachment theory? We've been very successful over the last few decades in educating parents about not smoking during pregnancy, not drinking during pregnancy, not smoking in the car with your children, how to give them nutritious food. Much of that has been a huge success. But we've never really had a public health campaign based on the fundamental building block of emotional maturity, if you like, in children, which is strong early attachments. And whether, certainly when I was at DFE, we were considering whether we should consider the idea of a big public health campaign that looks at attachment and illustrates the importance of it, not necessarily just to women, but to men as well, to fathers with whom an attachment is as important as it is to a mother.
Yes. Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely spot on and gives me the chance to mention that the LSE's report in 2019 illustrates the cost of insecure attachment. So the cost is 50% higher than to a securely attached child if that infant is not securely attached to their mum. So around about £4,000. But if that infant baby is not securely attached to their dad, it can be 4 times higher than that. And that obviously is the importance of dads. And I do think my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise not just the importance of secure attachment, but very specifically the importance of dads in providing that holistic support for fathering. It is absolutely crucial. And one of the things that my Best Start for Life project is doing is to commission nationally and free to all early years practitioners various different bits of training. One of those is in reflective parenting, so that everybody who is working with families, whether as a volunteer or as a professional, will actually have the knowledge to understand how reflective parenting can contribute to secure attachment. Another one is video interaction guidance, to demonstrate to families very clearly where the good is and where the not so good is, in a way that's been very clearly evaluated. So there is a lot of work going on within the Best Start for Life project to try and really skill up all of those who are volunteering and working in the early years sector, but also to roll out the support for families so that if you're expecting a baby, you go to your family hub. If you want a book, you'll go to your library. If you want a bottle of milk, choose your supermarket. That's what we want to have, is that family hubs are just a household name, that if you have a child, particularly if you have a baby, that's where you go. You go there if you're rich, you go there if you're not rich, if you're young, if you're old, if you're a carer. And what we know is that that kind of learning from each other in a supportive environment will really transform the world. And I do just want to very briefly finish up with talking about childcare, because whilst my role as early years healthy development advisor is about the early years itself and the nurturing support, nevertheless, most babies do find themselves in a childcare setting when they're still very young, 6 months to a year old. And so actually that is a continuum, you know, that period, that critical period, the 1,001 critical days, the period from conception to the age of 2, where the vast majority of the lifelong blocks for emotional and physical health are laid down. That period of time, you can spend a lot of it in a nursery setting at the moment. And it seems to me that there's 2 issues here. One is quality, and that must be about parental choice. So we need good quality nurseries, but we also need choice for parents if they want their mum, and their mum is able to look after their baby. We should be willing to say, thank you very much, Granny, you will get some sort of payment for that. Not as if you were a trained nanny or nursery worker, but there should be some sort of carers allowance, attendance allowance for grandparents who are actually going part-time so that they can care for their own relatives. Secondly, childminding. We've already heard that childminding has fallen off a cliff, and that is because we've put regulatory burdens, well, in fact, they predate this government, this Conservative government, but regulation has been so great that it's taken a lot of people out of childminding. And actually, for me, if I had a 6-month-old, I would much rather my baby was in a home environment rather than a nursery environment in a baby setting. And we need to go with the grain of what works for families. So I think having choices, quality nurseries, many, many more childminders, and support for those, as we do if you're looking after your elderly husband or your elderly wife with disabilities or whatever, you get an attendance allowance. But if you're going part-time to look after your granddaughter or your grandson or your niece or your nephew, you get nothing. It's a straight choice and it costs you financially quite significantly. So I think I would urge the Minister to consider that. And then the final thing, I think, is flexibility for parents. What we know is that families know best what works for them. What we also know is that we tend not to just have one child. So, you know, it's very, very difficult when you have child number one. But when you're faced with 50 quid a day for a tip-top nursery because you want to go back and work, you know, 9 till 5, and then you need to get to work and you need to get back and pick up your child. So you're faced with huge nursery costs. Then you have a second child. For an awful lot of women, it's simply not worth going back to work. But if we were to allow parents to have their own budget for childcare that they would use, they would decide. In my opinion, for me, I wanted my first child back out of childcare when the second one was born, because you want them to be together. If you're at home on maternity leave, why not have your two children together? It should be a choice that families can have. But if the first one is now 3 years old, then you don't want to lose those 3 hours of childcare, even though actually it would probably suit you to have them both at home. So I think giving parents the choice is the thing I would urge the government to look at. You know, it's difficult enough without there being hurdles in the way that make it absolutely unaffordable and absolutely inflexible for far too many families. So I'm delighted with the work the government is doing, rolling out the family hubs and the Best Start for Life, but I do think childcare is a part of it and we need to do more to give families more choice. Thank you.